For 12 years, Rob Gronkowski refused to even say his name. Then he sat down, leaned back, and finally talked.
We heard stories about like him being in the team meeting room, like beating off and like doing crazy.
What he revealed about Aaron Hernandez, the rumors, the silence, the chaos he witnessed firsthand, will change how you see one of football's darkest stories forever.
I'm not going to conform. I'm not going to
At the time, you're just thinking to yourself, man, this guy really loves ball.
Deny.
Stay until the end. The story nobody was supposed to tell. In May of 2025, Rob Gronkowski, one of the most beloved, most decorated, most cheerfully ridiculous athletes the National Football League has ever produced, sat down behind a microphone, leaned back in his chair, and casually said something out loud that the rest of us were never really supposed to hear. He didn't whisper it. He didn't bury it under a mountain of qualifiers. He just let it fall out of his mouth in that same easy, unbothered, happy to be here tone that made him a household name in the first place. And within hours, the clip was everywhere. The setting was the Bussin' with the Boys podcast, a show run by current and former players who specialize in pulling stories out of athletes that no traditional reporter could ever get. They had Gronkowski in the chair, and there was really only one thing they wanted to ask him about. Not the Super Bowls, not the spikes, not the parties. They wanted to ask him about the teammate whose name still makes the entire Patriots organization go quiet, Aaron Hernandez. And so one of the hosts set the trap, almost apologetically, the way you bring up something you're not sure you're allowed to say.
We heard stories about like him being in the team meeting room, like beating off and like doing crazy.
That was the question, a rumor that had floated around New England football circles for more than a decade. Never printed, never confirmed, never quite buried either. The kind of locker room legend that gets passed from player to player like a ghost story. And the man being asked about it was someone who had spent 12 full years saying almost nothing at all on the subject. So everyone braced for a denial, or a deflection, or that famous Gronk laugh that swallows hard questions whole. Instead, he gave them this.
That's a possibility, that one. I may or may have not seen it live.
A possibility, may or may not have seen it live, for a man who had walked out of interviews rather than say this person's name. That single sentence was a seismic shift, and he wasn't finished. He refused to hand the internet a clean confirmation, but he refused to deny it either, which in the strange grammar of viral content is somehow louder than both.
I'm not going to conform. I'm not going to
At the time, you're just thinking to yourself, man, this guy really loves ball.
Deny.
And here's the part that turned a crude anecdote into a genuine cultural moment. Because Gronkowski didn't recoil from it, didn't moralize about it, didn't perform the obligatory disgust that a story like that usually demands. He did the exact opposite. He embraced it, the way he has embraced every wild, chaotic, unhinged thing that has ever happened within arm's reach of him.
I mean, I love crazy shit, so like, I didn't mind things like that.
He wasn't scandalized. He was, in his own way, almost impressed by the sheer audacity of it, filing it away under the enormous mental folder he keeps labeled legendary nonsense I have personally witnessed.
I was a wild man myself, so like, I was like, nothing fazed me.
And then, almost as a footnote, he admitted he hadn't just tolerated the chaos around him. He cheered it on, because nothing about the wildest teammate he ever had managed to rattle him. But before the laughter could carry the whole thing into pure spectacle, Gronkowski did something that in hindsight tells you everything about how complicated his feelings really are. The very first thing he wanted on the record, before the rumor, before the jokes, before any of it, was respect for the man as a player.
First off, unbelievable football player, man.
And that is the tension that sent this clip ricocheting across every corner of the internet within a single afternoon. The reaction split almost perfectly down the middle, the way it always does when Gronkowski opens his mouth. Half the world saw it as quintessential Gronk, unbothered, unfiltered, telling a story the way only he would dare to tell it, treating one of the darkest figures in modern football history with the same shrug he'd give a tale about a wild night out. The other half recoiled, arguing that there was something deeply uncomfortable about laughing at all, given everything Aaron Hernandez did and everything he ultimately became. But both reactions, in their own way, missed the bigger picture. Because buried inside the jokes and the I'm not gonna confirm deflections was the rarest thing in the entire Hernandez saga. A genuine eyewitness, finally talking. Someone who was actually there, day after day, in the same meeting rooms and the same huddles, who had spent more than a decade saying nothing and was now, at last, saying something. To understand why that clip detonated the way it did, you have to rewind 15 years, all the way back to a moment when the future looked impossibly bright for both of these men. Before Aaron Hernandez was a headline, before he was a mugshot, before he was a cautionary tale whispered about in documentaries, he was something almost nobody remembers him as anymore. He was a prospect, a kid from a small town, walking into the best situation in professional football. In the 2010 NFL Draft, the New England Patriots selected Hernandez with the 113th overall pick, a fourth-round flyer on a young tight end out of the University of Florida whose talent had never been in question. The kid himself, fresh-faced and grinning, introduced himself to the world with the kind of hometown pride that makes draft day what it is.
I'm Hernandez from Bristol, Connecticut. I play at Bristol Central High School.
The broadcast booth could barely contain itself. On the field, the consensus was simple and emphatic.
He was the best tight end in football taught last year, the John Mackey Award winner.
I think Aaron Hernandez is a tremendous pick.
What made it all so remarkable is that the Patriots had already spent a second-round pick that very same draft on Rob Gronkowski, which meant New England had just stocked its roster with two tight ends, the same position, the same age, walking into the same locker room on the same day. On paper, it looked like a luxury. In practice, it became one of the most devastating offensive weapons the sport had ever seen. Two enormous, freakishly athletic young men lined up on either side of Tom Brady, daring defenses to figure out which nightmare to deal with first, and it worked almost immediately. By their second season together, the numbers they put up weren't just good. They were the kind of numbers that rewrite the record books and make grown coordinators lose sleep. Gronkowski himself laid it out years later, still a little awed by it. That is the part of the story that gets lost underneath everything that came later. And it's the part Gronkowski clearly still mourns, because Hernandez in those years wasn't merely a complimentary piece. He was a force of nature in his own right, a man built like a linebacker, who moved like a wide receiver, lining up everywhere on the field and dismantling whatever the defense threw at him. If Aaron Hernandez was this good, this gifted, this clearly destined for greatness, and if his own running mate is now, more than a decade later, sitting on a podcast laughing about the crazy he witnessed and refusing to confirm or deny one of the strangest rumors in NFL history, then what exactly was happening behind the scenes? What did the people closest to him actually see? And what, if anything, did they decide to keep to themselves? Because the truth, as you're about to find out, is far stranger, far sadder, and far more human than any single locker room rumor could ever capture. The double life everyone could almost see. For years, Rob Gronkowski was the last person on earth willing to talk about Aaron Hernandez, and that silence is its own kind of evidence. This is a man who will say almost anything to almost anyone. Yet when CBS sat him down for a group interview shortly after Hernandez's death, and the subject came up, the famously chatty Gronkowski went cold, gave a two-word answer, and then physically removed himself from the conversation. When the reporter kept pushing, he stood up and walked off the set entirely. It would take until 2021, years of silence, before he finally said anything substantive at all, and even then, the words were heavy and careful. The words of a man still trying to process something he never fully understood. And in that same conversation, he said the thing that has quietly haunted every former teammate who's ever been asked about Hernandez. The slow, painful realization that being great at football tells you almost nothing about the person underneath the helmet. So why the silence? Why does the most unfilterable man in football suddenly lock up when this one name comes out? The answer is that the people who shared a locker room with Aaron Hernandez in his final seasons saw things that did not fit the highlight reel. And the most damning account came not from a stranger, but from a fellow offensive weapon. Speaking to the Boston Globe, receiver Brandon Lloyd described Hernandez as volatile, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous to the people around him. According to that reporting, Hernandez could swing from one extreme to the other without any warning at all. One moment hyper-aggressive and ready to fight anyone in the room. The next moment childlike, vulnerable, almost desperate for reassurance, asking whether he was even good enough to be there. He would seek validation 1 second and storm off in a blind rage the next. And Lloyd wasn't alone in noticing it. An anonymous teammate echoed those same unsettling observations in an interview with People magazine, describing a man whose moods you could never quite predict or trust. What none of them knew at the time was that the instability they were watching had roots that stretched back long before Hernandez ever pulled on a Patriots jersey. The story of Aaron Hernandez is, in the end, the story of a boy who was handed an unbearable amount of pain very early and was never given the tools to carry it. When he was just 16 years old, his father, the central figure in his entire world, died suddenly from complications after what should have been a routine surgery. By every account from the people who knew him, Aaron never truly recovered. The grief curdled into rebellion, the family fractured, and the structure that had been holding his young life together simply fell away. Layered beneath even that loss were darker, more private wounds. In its sweeping 2018 investigation into his life, the Boston Globe reported that those closest to Hernandez believed he had been carrying secrets for most of his life about his childhood, his pain, and his identity. His brother and one of his own own attorneys later said he had disclosed being abused as a very young child, an experience he reportedly believed shaped him in ways he never made peace with. And then there was the question that the tabloids would eventually turn into a circus. The question of his sexuality. That part of the story came from a man who knew him before any of the fame, Dennis Sansucci, his high school quarterback, on the record with the Boston Globe to say the two had a secret relationship dating back to their teenage years. What Sansucci described more than anything wasn't scandal. It was concealment, the exhausting, lifelong labor of hiding. That single idea.
Me and Aaron experimented, and it was something that, I'll be honest with, that we continued because we probably enjoyed it.
A man performing one life in public while privately carrying another runs through every chapter of his story, and you can trace it all the way back to college, at the University of Florida, where he arrived at just 17 years old. Teammates remember a very different kid than the one who would eventually stand trial. They called him Chico, and they remember a B student who loved to party hard and who was already showing signs of trouble he kept narrowly escaping, including an incident where, by one teammate's account, he punched a bar manager so hard he ruptured the man's eardrum and faced no real consequence for it at all. Time and again, people stepped in to protect him. That, more than almost anything, became the quiet through line of his entire life. A gifted young man who was rarely, if ever, made to face the consequences of his own actions because his talent was simply too valuable to risk. The eardrum incident was just one example of many. He kept tripping over the line that separates a promising career from a criminal record, and someone always seemed to be there to pull him back across it before it was too late. One of those someones was a teammate whose name has become synonymous with discipline and faith. Tim Tebow, who reportedly interceded for Hernandez more than once at Florida, even convincing the coaching staff not to throw him off the team. And to this day, Tebow remains one of the very few people who refuses to pile on, who insists there is more to the story than the headlines ever allowed.
Too much of that has been sensationalized rather than just kind of tell the root of the story.
When pressed on it, he pushed back against the entire machinery of sensationalism. For Tebow, it was never about defending the actions. It was about refusing to flatten a complicated, tragic human being into a punchline or a monster. But the protection that surrounded Aaron Hernandez at Florida.
It's hard for me to even answer your questions because I don't want to be a part of just talking about it. I don't want to, it's not really my place.
The favors and the second chances and the looking the other way could only last so long because the trajectory he was on did not bend toward redemption. It bent toward catastrophe. In June of 2013, a semi-pro football player named Odin Lloyd, a man connected to Hernandez through their girlfriends, who were sisters, was found shot to death in an industrial park less than a mile from Hernandez's home. And the evidence, piece by circumstantial piece, pointed back to the Patriots' young star. In 2015, Aaron Hernandez was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The man who had been drafted into the best situation in football, who had signed a contract worth more than $40 million, who had stood beside Rob Gronkowski as one half of the greatest tight end duo the league had ever assembled, was now a convicted killer. The Patriots cut him within hours of his arrest. The teammates who had laughed with him scrambled to make sense of a person they realized they had never really known. Even Tom Brady, the quarterback who had thrown him so many of those touchdowns, retreated into careful, almost bureaucratic distance, telling reporters that his job was simply to play quarterback, regardless of who was on the field, that he had moved on. And yet, in a detail that captures just how tangled all of this really is, Hernandez himself, writing from behind bars, expressed nothing but love for his old teammates, naming Brady as one of the men he was closest to and saying he loved him to death. The affection, however, twisted the circumstances, appears to have been real, and some of his friends never abandoned him either, standing by him publicly even as the rest of the world recoiled. But the most disturbing chapter of all was still to come. Not in a courtroom, and not on a football field, but inside a laboratory, where scientists would finally open up the one place no teammate, no coach, and no reporter had ever been able to see. What they found inside his head. On the morning of April 19, 2017, the news broke the way the worst news always does.
The former NFL star Aaron Hernandez found dead in his prison cell overnight.
Suddenly, mid-broadcast, in a tone that hadn't quite caught up to what it was reporting. He was 27 years old. He had hanged himself in his cell at the Souza Baranowski Correctional Center, just days after being acquitted in a separate double murder case, a moment that should have given him a flicker of hope. The cruelty of the timing left everyone reeling, including the friends who had spoken to him in his final hours. One of them, Mike Pouncey, said he had talked to Hernandez the very night before, and that he had seemed like a completely different man than someone on the edge of giving up. The grief of those who refused to write him off was raw and unguarded. Pouncey posted a tribute calling Hernandez his friend and brother, saying that through thick and thin, right or wrong, they had never left each other's side. It was a love that the headlines had no category for. Then almost immediately came the question that would reframe everything, the question that is, in the end, the real answer to what they hid from all of us. It wasn't a conspiracy. It wasn't a buried murder plot. It was something far more haunting, a wound that had been growing silently inside his own skull, invisible to every camera and every teammate and every doctor he ever walked past. His family wanted his brain donated to science, to the renowned CTE Center at Boston University, and almost instantly, a fight broke out over who controlled it. His defense attorney, Jose Baez, accused the state of refusing to release it.
It is our position that they are holding Aaron Hernandez's brain illegally.
And the urgency of that battle told you that everyone involved already suspected what the examination might reveal. When the results finally came back, they were staggering. The study found that Aaron Hernandez had stage 3 chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, on a scale where stage 4 is the most severe, advanced damage almost never seen in someone who died as young as he did. This is a degenerative brain disease caused by repeated head trauma, the kind a tight end absorbs on nearly every single play, accumulating quietly across a lifetime of football that began when he was a child.
Everything from depression, anxiety, agitation, violent behaviors, suicide attempts.
And the symptoms associated with it read like a checklist of everything his teammates had described without understanding what they were watching. The very same disease had been found in another Patriots player, whose death stunned the league, Junior Seau, who took his own life in 2012 and was later found to have suffered from CTE as well, a parallel that suddenly felt less like coincidence and more like a pattern the sport had been ignoring. The list of behaviors that doctors connect to this kind of brain damage is chilling in its familiarity. Now read that list again and hold it next to the man Brandon Lloyd described. The rages, the volatility, the swings from aggression to childlike vulnerability, the paranoia that crept into his final season. Hold it next to the impulsivity, the poor judgment, the emotional collapse. The researchers were careful, as good scientists must be, to stop short of saying the disease caused any single act. As one neurologist cautioned, these are symptoms that also appear in people who never suffered a head injury at all, which makes it genuinely difficult to know what came from the hits and what came from everything else. CTE is not a legal defense, and it is not an eraser for accountability, but it is undeniably context, a missing piece that had been sitting inside him the whole time. His family certainly believed it was more than context. Hernandez's fiancée filed a lawsuit against the NFL and the Patriots on behalf of their young daughter, with his attorney arguing that he might still be alive today if it weren't for the disease. The suit claimed the league and the team should have known better than to keep sending him out there. And this is where the whole story circles back to Rob Gronkowski, sitting on that podcast, laughing about the crazy chaos of it all, and then just for a moment, not laughing at all. Because for every joke he cracked about the wild things he witnessed, there was a sentence underneath it that revealed how little even he had truly seen. The man who shared a locker room and a position group in an entire era with Aaron Hernandez admitted that the thing the rest of us call a scandal hit him as a genuine, blindsiding shock. It wasn't just him. It was, he insisted, something that nobody around the team could have predicted, because the gap between the player they knew and the crimes they were reading about was simply too vast to bridge. And beneath the surprise,
and then I didn't see, it going to the level that it went to. I didn't see that happening. Like, that was a surprise.
When the bravado finally fell away, what Gronkowski was left with was something much simpler and much sadder. The same thing anyone is left with when they watch someone they cared about destroy themselves and everyone around them.
It was a surprise to everyone because you would never expect anyone.
Grief, tangled up with a kind of bewildered anger that never finds a satisfying answer.
Also disappointed. Like, why would you do that?
That question, why would you do that, is the one that has no clean reply, because the honest answer isn't a single villainous choice. It's a lifetime of compounding damage. A father lost too soon, old wounds never healed, secrets carried in silence, a culture that protected the player and ignored the person, and a brain quietly deteriorating under the weight of the very game that made him famous. None of it excuses what he did to Odin Lloyd, or to Lloyd's family, who lost a son and a brother forever. But all of it complicates the cartoon version of Aaron Hernandez that the internet prefers. And maybe that's the real revelation hiding inside a viral podcast clip. The title promised that Gronkowski would expose some buried secret, some conspiracy that they kept from all of us. But the most unsettling truth is that nothing was really hidden by anyone at all. The murder was front-page news. The trial was televised. The brain disease was published for the world to read. The thing that was actually concealed was concealed by biology itself, locked away in a place no one could look until it was far, far too late. Gronkowski didn't pull back a curtain on a cover-up. He just reminded us, in his own blunt and bumbling and weirdly tender way, that he was right there in the room the whole time and still never saw it coming. And maybe Tim Tebow, of all people, put the only lesson worth taking from any of it best, that none of us are ever quite as far from a dark road as we like to believe. Two young men were drafted on the same day into the same locker room, chasing the same dream. One became a Hall of Fame legend who'll be telling stories on podcasts for the rest of his life. The other became a name people lower their voices to say. The talent, Gronkowski insists, was identical, limitless in fact. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.